First of all, it's a surreal experience.
He killed her.
First of all, it is a surreal experience to even say the words. He killed her. Simple, brutal, yet laden with a weight that lingers long after it's spoken. For years, Blake Fieldercivil, the man whose life became inseparable from Amy Winehouse's, stayed silent. He became, in the eyes of the public, a villain, a scapegoat for a tragedy that seemed incomprehensible. Many people blamed him for introducing Amy to heroin, for being part of the chaos that ultimately consumed her. The public outcry was merciless, painting him as the architect of her demise. But what happens when we look deeper? When we remove the sensational headlines, the tabloid caricatures, and the finger-pointing, what remains is a story not just about two individuals, but about a world that failed them both. Amy Winehouse, the gifted singer whose voice could both haunt and heal, died at the age of 27. She became an eternal icon almost overnight, immortalized by her talent by tragedy, and by the narrative spun around her final years. Meanwhile, Blake faded into obscurity, a shadow lingering on the edges of her legacy. For more than a decade, he has kept quiet, watching the world tell the story without him. Now, however, Blake is ready to speak, not to defend himself, but to unravel the truth, to share the story as he lived it. I blame myself for years, he admits, the weight of those words tangible in his voice. I still do in a lot of ways. But Amy's death wasn't the result of one bad decision. It wasn't just me. He speaks of her father, the tabloids, the paparazzi, and even the so-called fans who cheered when she faltered. We all killed her, he confesses. This isn't a story about redemption. It isn't a neatly packaged narrative where wrongs are corrected and the villain becomes a hero. It's a reckoning, a raw, painful reckoning that forces us to confront not just the choices of those directly involved, but the broader world that watched, judged, and ultimately contributed to destruction. For the first time, Blake Fieldercivil is willing to speak the truth about a love that destroyed them both, and the world that stood by, entertained, and complicitly watched it happen. Amy and Blake's story was drenched in darkness. From the outside, it appeared toxic, almost like a circus for the tabloids. But to them, it was something else entirely, a connection born of chaos, of pain, and of the strange comfort two broken souls can find in each other. They met in 2005 at a pub in Camden, a place pulsating with the same restless energy they carried within themselves. Sparks didn't just fly, they exploded, leaving trails of obsession, intensity, and unspoken understanding. Amy, the rising star with a voice that could shake souls, and Blake, the restless wanderer with a bruised heart, found in each other a mirror, broken mirrors, reflecting not only their desires and fears, but also the scars left by childhoods that demanded resilience far too early. Their connection was not conventional. It was not the gentle unfolding of love stories told in films and novels. It was visceral, jagged, and relentless, a collision of two lives that would forever be intertwined in ways neither could have predicted. And so begins the story we will unravel together. A story of love, addiction, fame, loss, and the haunting consequences of a world that consumes and discards its brightest talents. We will go step by step, moment by moment, to understand not only what happened between Amy Winehouse and Blake Fieldercivil, but why it happened and how it reflects a society eager to witness tragedy without truly intervening. This journey will take us to the heights of fame, the depths of addiction, the private moments of intimacy, and the public spectacles that forever shaped their lives. It is a story that asks difficult questions. Who bears the responsibility when someone spirals in front of the world? Is it the loved ones, the fans, the media, or all of us together? Blake's voice, long silent, now begins to answer those questions with a mix of regret, insight, and unflinching honesty. As we embark on this narrative, remember, this is not just a story of blame or guilt. It is a story of humanity, of vulnerability, of the consequences of neglect, and of the enduring echoes of love that both elevates and destroys. In 2005, the chaotic streets of Camden, London, served as the unlikely backdrop for one of the most intense and destructive romances in modern music history. Amid the thrumming energy of pubs and live music venues, two individuals arrived carrying invisible baggage, emotional wounds that had shaped them far more than the world around them. Amy Winehouse, already recognized for her extraordinary talent, walked into a dimly lit Camden pub where Blake Fielder-Civil lingered. It was not the kind of place where fairy tales begin, but for them, it was a perfect stage, rough, unpolished, authentic, and alive with restless energy. Their meeting was not love at first sight. There was no instant, romantic chemistry as described in conventional narratives. Instead, there was obsession, an immediate, mutual recognition of brokenness. Sparks did not merely fly. They erupted with the force of two lives colliding. Amy, with her piercing eyes and fearless attitude, saw something familiar in Blake, a restless, wounded soul, equally reckless and searching for something beyond himself. Blake, in turn, was drawn to her brilliance and the raw vulnerability that lurked behind her public persona. He recalls, "She was unlike anyone I had ever met. Loud, sharp, fearless, but also deeply sad. You could see it in her eyes. I think she saw the same in me." What made their connection so intense was that they were not only drawn to each other's energy, but to each other's pain. Both came from fractured families. Both had grown up too fast, learning resilience, survival, and mistrust earlier than they should have. Their childhoods, though different in texture, were cut from the same cloth. Instability, absence, and the type of emotional neglect that leaves long, invisible scars. For Amy, it was the separation of her parents when she was just a child, the loss of a secure home, and a constant search for love that felt consistent and unconditional. For Blake, it was a turbulent upbringing in Lincolnshire, with an emotionally distant father and a mother struggling to hold the pieces together. By the time he became a teenager, he was already slipping into petty crime, drug experimentation, and a desire to escape the limitations of a world that had never felt safe. Their first conversations revealed the depth of their understanding of each other. There were no pretenses, no carefully constructed social masks. They spoke in sarcasm, in humor, in shared cynicism about the world and those who failed to understand them. Both were fascinated by music, not as a career or a path to fame, but as a means of expression, a conduit for the intense emotions they could not otherwise communicate. Amy had a voice that could shake souls, but behind it was a girl who felt deeply, whose artistry was inseparable from her pain. Blake, with his sharp wit and a restless spirit, was both captivated and haunted by the intensity he sensed in her. They quickly became inseparable, not in the soft, romantic way depicted in movies, but with the obsessive, codependent energy of two individuals recognizing themselves in each other. "We didn't fall in love like most people do," Blake admits. "It was more like we crashed into each other, and neither of us ever really walked away from the wreck." To outsiders, their behavior seemed erratic, chaotic, and self-destructive. To Amy and Blake, it felt inevitable, almost fated. It was as if their brokenness had been waiting for a mirror, and they had found it in each other. This was not simply a romantic attraction. It was an emotional collision. They fed off each other's intensity, and in doing so, created a world in which normal boundaries seemed irrelevant. Amy's songs during this period, early drafts of tracks that would later appear on Back to Black, were a reflection of the relationship's emotional extremes. Lyrics pour out like confessional diary entries, raw, unfiltered, and imbued with the chaotic love she and Blake shared. Critics described it as toxic. Amy described it as real. Beneath the passion, however, was a dangerous dependency. Two individuals using each other as a shield, a comfort, and ultimately a destructive crutch. Their bond was amplified by the shared shadows of their childhoods. Amy and Blake did not just fall into each other's arms. They recognized a reflection of their own pain, a familiar ache they had carried for years. For Amy, Blake's chaotic energy mirrored the instability she had known at home. For Blake, Amy's brilliance and volatility reflected his own struggles to feel seen and understood. They craved intensity because it was the only life they truly knew. And though the intensity often led to destruction, for a time it also felt like home, a strange, imperfect home built on the understanding that they did not have to explain themselves to anyone else. In those early months, their love was both exhilarating and perilous. Every glance, every touch, every shared joke carried the weight of past trauma and unspoken longing. It was love forged in fire, in shared scars, in the unspoken knowledge that each had already seen the darkest part of the other, and, in some ways, craved them. But as with all relationships founded on mutual damage, there was an inherent risk. The intensity that initially drew them together also carried the seeds of their eventual collapse. They had found a connection unlike any other, but it was one that could not withstand the pressures of the world, fame, addiction, and the unrelenting scrutiny of a public eager to witness their destruction. For now, however, in the chaotic, music-filled pubs of Camden, two broken souls had found each other, and in that union lay both their greatest joy and their most profound peril. As their relationship deepened, the intensity that had drawn Amy Winehouse and Blake Fielder Civil together began to take on a darker hue. What started as obsession and recognition of shared pain slowly morphed into something more dangerous, something that neither of them fully understood at the time: addiction. For Blake, drugs had always been a way to cope, a method of numbing the internal chaos that had accompanied him since childhood. He had learned early on that the world was unpredictable, that safety was an illusion, and that pleasure, escape, or distraction could be found in substances that temporarily erased the weight of reality. Amy, on the other hand, had not yet fully ventured into the depths of chemical dependency. Her life was already a balancing act between fame, creative expression, and personal turmoil. But the intensity of her connection with Blake, combined with the pressures of rising stardom, created fertile ground for experimentation. Their relationship was not just romantic. It was a shared journey into extremes. It was a bond forged not only by affection, but by mutual risk-taking, by an unspoken understanding that normalcy was foreign and uninteresting. Blake had been using heroin long before Amy ever touched it. For him, the drug was a shield, a way to shut out the static in his mind, the lingering echoes of a tumultuous childhood. He never glamorized it. It was not rebellion or indulgence. It was survival. But when Amy saw him in that state, she became curious. She didn't see a villain. She saw someone she loved, someone whose world she desperately wanted to understand. Her interest wasn't born from naivety alone. It was a desire for connection so profound that she was willing to risk herself to feel it. The night Amy first asked to try heroin, it was not a casual decision. It was a request loaded with love, curiosity, and a need to fully comprehend Blake's world. "I just want to feel what you feel," she told him. "I want to know you completely." Blake's response was instinctive, protective, and filled with desperation. "No, this isn't for you, Amy. Don't do this." But the dynamics of their relationship were complex. He knew, even in his refusal, that the moment they crossed his threshold, their lives would change irrevocably. The trust, the intimacy, and the intensity of their bond would now be intertwined with something dangerous, something that had the power to consume them both. That night marked the beginning of a slow, inexorable descent. Blake watched the light in Amy's eyes dim, the spark of vitality that had always been so uniquely hers, fading as the drug took hold. It was a terrifying, heartbreaking moment, and he knew immediately that he had opened a door that could never be closed. Heroin was more than a drug for Amy. It became a gateway to detachment, a means of escaping pain, pressure, and the relentless scrutiny of a world that demanded perfection while offering little compassion. For Blake, it became a shared ritual, a toxic intimacy disguised as connection. The early days of their addiction were marked by secrecy, denial, and fleeting moments of euphoria. In private, the drugs created a sense of closeness and understanding that the outside world could never penetrate. In public, however, their behavior began to draw attention. Small incidents of erratic conduct were captured in fleeting glances and whispered rumors, gradually escalating to tabloid coverage, paparazzi shots, and invasive speculation. Their love, once insular and intense, now became fodder for a world eager to watch two young people spiral. As addiction took hold, the consequences became increasingly visible. Amy's brilliance, once so evident in her music and her presence, began to fade. The laughter, the creativity, the spark that had drawn so many to her performances started to dim. Blake, already struggling with his own demons, felt helpless to intervene. He could hold her as she came down from a high, could comfort her in moments of despair, but he could not stop the cycle. Night after night, the drugs became both a bond and a weapon, eroding the very connection they had once cherished. Underlying the chaos was an unbearable guilt that haunted Blake relentlessly. He knew he had introduced Amy to heroin. He understood the role he had played in her slow descent. But his guilt was complicated by the understanding that he was not the sole force behind her struggles. Fame, media scrutiny, public expectation, and the relentless pressures of the music industry all conspired against her. Yet, in the private moments, the intimacy that had brought them together, Blake felt the unbearable weight of responsibility. He was both protector and destroyer, participant and observer, witness and culprit. The lives of Amy Winehouse and Blake Fieldercivil were no longer private matters. Their struggles, once contained in dimly lit flats and private moments of pain, were now displayed for the world to scrutinize. Fame had become a magnifying glass, intensifying every mistake, every relapse, and every argument. The very world that celebrated Amy's voice now watched her unravel, with Blake at her side, labeled a villain in their unfolding tragedy. By 2008, Blake's actions were no longer confined to whispers behind closed doors. Arrested for assault and sentenced to prison, he became an easy target for tabloids eager for a scapegoat. Headlines screamed with relentless accusation. Blake behind bars while Amy falls apart, and junkie husband ruins soul diva. The narrative was simple and cruel. He was a cause, she was a victim, and the world could watch the drama unfold as if it were a serialized story on someone else's life. Yet, Blake understood that reality was far more complex. He had made mistakes, yes, but he was far from the sole architect of Amy's struggles. While Blake served his time, Amy was left to navigate a world that demanded perfection even as it offered none. She continued performing, recording, and creating art, but each public appearance was another gauntlet of pressure. Fans, management teams, and media outlets scrutinized her every word, every gesture, every stumble. The irony was cruel. The world wanted Amy to embody the image of the untouchable genius, but also demanded a spectacle of chaos. There was no room for the human being behind the music. The toll was immediate and devastating. Amy's performances became erratic. Her energy faltered, and her voice, once her lifeline, was strained by exhaustion and substance abuse. Blake recalls watching footage of her from prison, the pain slicing through him. Slurred speech on stage, a distant gaze, and an audience that alternated between cheers and jeers. He could do nothing. Every song, every note, every glance on stage reminded him of the distance he could not bridge. He was trapped, helpless, and consumed with guilt. She needed someone to fight for her, he remembers, and I was locked away, hating myself. The media's relentless scrutiny amplified the isolation they already felt. Photographers followed them. Tabloids printed exaggerated accounts of their fights, and every relapse was publicized as moral failure. Their addiction, already private and painful, became performance art for a society that had lost empathy. Blake and Amy were not merely battling drugs or personal demons. They were contending with a global audience that demanded spectacle while offering no support. As Amy Winehouse's star ascended, the world around her grew louder, more invasive, and infinitely more perilous. Fame, which had once promised recognition and artistic validation, became a double-edged sword, a relentless spotlight that illuminated every flaw, magnified every misstep, and left little room for privacy, compassion, or genuine support. Amy and Blake's relationship, already intense and fragile, was now under the microscope of a global audience eager to dissect, judge, and sensationalize. From the early days of her rising fame, Amy's life was transformed from private struggle to public spectacle. Each stage performance, every public appearance, and even her casual outings became fodder for tabloid headlines. The media narrative was clear. Amy Winehouse, the tragic genius, was unraveling before the world's eyes, and Blake Fieldercivil was cast as the villain facilitating her downfall. Stories circulated about drugs, arguments, arrests, and bizarre behavior, often exaggerated or distorted, stripping away context and humanity. Headlines screamed about chaos, addiction, and blame, creating a pressure cooker of public expectation and judgment. Blake recalls the surreal nature of it all. The couple could not step outside without being photographed, followed, or scrutinized. Moments that were deeply private, intimate fights, personal victories, or simply sitting quietly together, were turned into narratives for mass consumption. We'd have a row in private, Blake says, and 20 minutes later, it would be in the papers. They followed us everywhere. They made us caricatures, villain and victim, Amy Winehouse and Blake Fielder's civil story is more than just a tale of fame, love, and tragedy. It's a mirror reflecting the human consequences of addiction, trauma, and society's relentless gaze. Behind the headlines and the music, there were two people struggling to survive, to connect, and to be understood. Their lives remind us that brilliance and vulnerability often coexist, and that love alone cannot always save us. Thank you for watching and joining me as we explored this story. If this video gave you insight, perspective, or even a moment to reflect, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the lives, struggles, and truths behind the icons we think we know.